Looking at the cover for Spec Ops: The Line, you would be forgiven in thinking it was just another run-of-the-mill modern shooter. Angry, slightly evil-looking white man on the cover? Check. Holding a gun? Check. Desert environment? Check. Even the name appears to be an afterthought. Spec Ops: The Line? Sure, that's a better title than Guns and Men, Kill All the People 5, but not by much. So yes, you'd be forgiven for dismissing 2K's latest as another genre entry not worth your time. In a truly rare turn of events for a shooter these days, you'd be wrong. Spec Ops: The Line attempts to be quite a few things that it can't quite seem to fully realize, but it should be lauded for treading ground that most modern shooters won't go near. At its core, Spec Ops is a cover-based third-person shooter. You play as Delta Operator Walker, voiced by Nathan Drake himself, Nolan North. Along with operators Lugo and Adams, Walker's mission is to infiltrate a storm-ravaged Dubai to carry out reconnaissance. The 33rd Army Battalion is suspected of desertion, although because of the storms their exact whereabouts are unknown. After locating and assessing the status of the 33rd, including their commanding officer Colonel Konrad, Walker is to leave the city and radio for extraction. The story is the main draw of Spec Ops, so it would be a mistake to share too much in this review. Just know that not everything goes according to plan, and Walker will go further and further into Dubai in order to carry out his mission. Drawing heavily from the novel Heart of Darkness, Spec Ops: The Line isn't afraid to deal with some very gruesome and unsettling subject matter. While Modern Warfare 2 met with widespread controversy over giving players a choice to murder civilians in the infamous No Russian level, Spec Ops trudges past that level of macabre storytelling in the first hour and then keeps going. Weak stomachs need not apply. Spec Ops is a brutal game. At 6 or 7 hours in length, Spec Ops campaign is right in line with Call of Duty, Battlefield, and a half-dozen other AAA shooters that have been released in the past few years. However, unlike the tentpoles of the genre, the story in Spec Ops is much tighter and more focused. The acting is nothing fancy, and most emotion is contrived rather than wrought with much skill, but the plot is intelligible and easy to follow. There are no nuclear devices set off to go in New York City, no World War III beginning in Europe, and try as I might, I can't remember a single tracksuiting wearing Russian in the entire game. While savage and slightly too aware for its own good, the story in Spec Ops drew me in much more than any shooter in recent memory. The same can't be said for the gameplay, unfortunately. Some large set pieces aside, most of the game is about as linear and repetitive as the worst that the genre has to offer. Much of your time will be spent hiding in cover, waiting for enemies to pop up, squeezing off a few rounds into their heads, and then moving into the next room to repeat the process. There's a decent arsenal available to the player, but nothing approaching the gun porn level that Call of Duty manages. Each of the game's dozen-odd weapons features an alternate fire mode, and that's about it. The modes range from attaching a suppressor to switching from burst to semi-automatic fire. Nothing needs to be unlocked, but many of the weapons will only be available after you kill the enemy who is carrying them. Please don't interpret this to mean the gameplay isn't fun, because it is. Repetitiveness and one truly awful cover system aside, the gameplay is solid. Unimaginative, sure. The gameplay only serves as a catalyst for delivering the story to the player, not as a bold reimagining of the mechanics that almost every third-person shooter employs. Maintaining the standard of good, but not great, the art direction and sound are both very competent. Dubai's shiny vistas are truly impressive upon first look, as are the incredible dust storms that crop up at various points throughout the game. If I spent more time experiencing them and less time vaulting over the same random boxes and similar rooms strewn throughout each chapter, I would likely be more impressed. Nolan North isn't the only thing that comes from the Uncharted series. There are some rather enjoyable moving set pieces and rapidly eroding areas to fight through. The sound is exceedingly average. Spec Ops does not make an effort to rise above the normal banal level of radio chatter that most shooters have grown accustomed to. Your squad mates mostly only serve to holler profane victory calls and question your every command, and the enemies seem incapable of any thought beyond, "Where are you? We're going to find you." A hard rock soundtrack creeps in during climactic fight scenes, but it only succeeds in cheapening the narrative depth that the game seems to try so hard for. I should mention multiplayer, because Spec Ops does technically include it. All you really need to know is that you won't be putting down your shooter of choice to switch over to it. More simplistic and repetitive than the campaign, it seemed shoehorned in to check off some invisible list of things every modern shooter must have. So, should you play Spec Ops: The Line? I would say so, especially if you're a fan of the current glut of modern shooters. While it lacks the scale and spectacle of Call of Duty or the multiplayer perfection of Battlefield, Spec Ops is a great experience for what it is. It offers a story that may actually make you think twice about the rampant digital slaughter available these days, and has a few things to say about those we lift up as the heroes of our culture. You likely won't come back to it after you complete the campaign, as the gameplay is too repetitive to enjoy once you know what happens in the story. Unless the multiplayer happens to be an exact fit for your preferences, you won't spend much time there either. I'd probably wait for Spec Ops to hit the $20 mark on sale or rent it. Just make sure you don't let it pass you by.